exactly the point. In Nigeria, we don't have actual regulatory bodies in terms of organ transplant. However, there are some setting guidelines by which we use in terms of the transplant. There is Istanbul Declaration, which states that organs should not be commercialized, and there are some other components of that regulation, which Nigeria adopted in 2014 as the National Health Act of 2014. It also has its own guideline about how organs should be given. Then, but these two guidelines, applying it to Nigeria, you discover that it has a lot of loopholes, maybe based on our culture and so many other factors. Then even the High Court came up with also regulations on how a donor affidavit should be given. These are the three things everybody operating, managing a transplant center is using right now. But where things are done properly, where they have a regulatory body, each agency has its own function. Just like I mentioned that Human Tissue Authority, elsewhere, like US, their own function is just about regulation on do's and don'ts. Then you also have organ procurement network. Their function is to talk to people just about, mostly they do disease donation. That is they get their own transplant from deceased donors. So they go to where people are mourning, especially people that die from kidney disease. They talk to them about the importance of donating kidneys, especially when they are dead. You understand? So these are the agencies. Then we also have the organ sharing, which also regulates how organs are being disbursed. These things are lacking. We are lacking it in Nigeria. So what I think, now what we do, after getting all these things, using the Istanbul Declaration, using the National Health Act guideline, and also the donor affidavit, we do some ethical checks. The patient has to go through ethical committee of any of the transplant center. Those ethical committees are made up of the doctors, a lawyer, a pastor, imam, and a representative of a social group. So
why are all of these people necessary?
Yes, they are important to make sure that things are done properly.
Pastor, imam,
yes,
in medicine?
Yes, ethics. We are talking about ethics. The moral aspect, the imam and all
side of it,
take
yes.
the moral aspect, the religious aspect, every other thing, and make sure that nobody is harmed. So all these people saying, oh, my kidney was chopped off when I'm sleeping, is not possible, because this thing takes time. When you want to do a transplant, you plan it ahead of time.
You can induce someone.
Yes,
and that's why the ethical...
Yes, that's what the ethical people are trying to find out.
Committees
can
help.
So the ethical committee will try to find out whether the person is doing it willingly, yes, the relationship between the donor and the recipient.
No, I mean, if I'm going to chop off your kidney without you knowing, am I going to subject myself to any ethical committee?
That's why it's not done that way. Before a transplant is done, everybody has to, there are so many things to sign.
Now, let me come in there.
So many things to sign.
What you have said is very important. Apart from, you mentioned that, oh, when kidneys are chopped off.
Yes.
If you haven't done all that test, you can't take an organ. If it is not compatible, it's a waste of time.
Yes.
So you must have run all the necessary tests. ABO compatibility, if they are not of the same blood group, you just randomly pick somebody on the street, his blood group B, and you're giving it to a blood group O person. It will not work.
But he actually mentioned it earlier when he talked about that could be for other purposes.
You have to screen for all diseases. Yes. And that's the first thing I mentioned when I got in here, that most of these cases that you hear, they are for other things, criminal-minded people, not in medicine. In medicine, for you to have a transplant done, you must have done all these tests, and this test takes time. You heard Professor Abdul talking about sending samples, sending blood samples to Cairo,
different countries,
to Sudan, you know,
to even UK.
To UK, and that is the truth. Before at Zenith, before we got the lab takes a lot of money to set up. So before we got that lab, we're only sending samples out of the country. I remember we're sending to South Africa at some point. Yeah. Then COVID started. Then from the airport there, the South African authorities will stop the blood sample because they don't know whether you are going to be infecting others with blood samples coming from Nigeria. And that's why I said we must be self-sufficient in the country. If we have our own lab, once we are self-sufficient, we don't need to send samples out the country.
So at Zenith now you have everything?
We have the lab. It's all in-house. There is in Kano also.
Yes.
And then the government has been able to, they are setting up about 2 or 3 centers. I think Jos, Guagalada, they are trying to set up a molecular lab.